Tonight's guest on A Conversation with Brian, we have Greg Taylor, a career educator who has spent almost 30 years in our profession. Greg is an excellent teacher. We worked together almost 20 years ago in the same elementary school. Greg has taught in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. He is a master at building student relationships and connections. He presently is a mentor teacher in Prince George's County. And we're going to talk to Greg about all things education and a little bit about his basketball career. Greg was a Division I basketball player. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome to A Conversation with Brian, Greg Taylor. Greg, it's been a long time coming. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Hey, at the beginning of each one of my shows, I ask my guests to talk a little bit about their personal story, their professional journey, so my audience gets to know you. So who is Greg Taylor?
Greg Taylor is a son of Washington, D.C., actually raised by my grandma in Northeast D.C., way back in the 70s and 80s. I can also say I'm a product of the city, a product of DC public school systems, even though I went to a private high school and eventually got a basketball scholarship to college. This is my 31st year in education that I got in quite by accident. I had no idea that I wanted to be a teacher, had no idea that I would ever make it a career.
You know, people say that, and that was me too. I had no idea and no interest. That was my undergrad degree was not in education, but I find a lot of my colleagues, especially my African-American male colleagues, didn't start this way.
Right. I was a psychology major, undergrad. Got out of school and came home, was looking for a job. And it just so happened in the summer, I worked as a camp counselor at Camp Round Meadow, which used to be a camp where fifth grade students would go in the summer for DC public schools. So I started there. It just so happened I was working with someone who worked in the DC science office for DC public schools. The DC science office was housed in Ann Beers Elementary School in some vacant rooms on the other side of the building. So I worked as an office assistant, trying to make some money, trying to figure out what I was going to do.
Sure.
And at the end of that year, the principal came up to me, Constance Harlingsworth. I always want to mention her name because she's the person that got me started in this business. She came up to me at the end of the year and said, I noticed when you walk through the halls, the students sort of gravitate towards you. Yeah. I noticed you have a good rapport with them. Have you ever thought about teaching? Now, at the time, I said, I'm not sure. I'm a psychology major.
Right.
So she says, well, DC has an alternative certification program. You can go to this alternative certification program. You can teach full-time during the day, and you take classes at night. So I thought about it and gave it a shot. And then when I saw the salaries that teachers were going to make, I was like, okay, it's more than what I'm making now.
Yeah.
So I gave that a shot, and 31 years later, here I am working as a mentor teacher.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day who was getting my book, and they actually started talking about, they got the ebook and they raced through my book and they mentioned you. And they mentioned, your section on relationships. And what I remember about you, Greg, is when we worked together at Glebe, truly the students gravitated towards you. And in your ability to connect with students, one is intuitive, but also it's purposeful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, everything that I've sort of received from this profession was because I had a relationship with somebody.
Yeah.
First of all, if I didn't have a good relationship with the principal at the school at the time, she never would have thought about me for that position.
Sure.
So everything, I thought back on my career, and every step of the way, anytime I got anything close to like a promotion or, like a move to a different office or something like that, it was because of the relationships that I built
Yeah.
before. Uh, so to me, relationships are everything. I
Yeah.
was lucky enough to have like fantastic teachers in DC public schools, all the way up to ninth grade, where I eventually went to the Murray School.
Right.
Actually had a basketball scholarship and played for Murray. But yeah, I always kind of wanted to be like my teachers and whatever I did.
Yeah.
For the most part, because they were so supportive. Part of my story is I was raised by my grandma, Northeast DC. And a lot of times now, I'll hear other teachers speak about, well, students come from a certain neighborhood, or they never
Right.
see the parents, or they never see, never see the parents at PTA meetings, or never see parents at school, and they make assumptions that the child doesn't have support, or that the culture in the home isn't such that the student that they value education.
Right. Yeah.
But in my case, you couldn't be farther from the truth for that. I was raised by my grandma, came from a neighborhood that people would probably discount. Uh, my grandma worked as a psychiatric nurse's assistant at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in
Right.
DC.
Yeah.
And so there were times when she depended on her shift, she would never come to a PTA meeting or anything like that. But I grew up in a house with my aunts where I was completely loved and nurtured. And even though in my family, I'm the second person to graduate from college, my aunt was the first. My aunt Linda was the first. But everybody in my family were avid readers.
Yeah.
So there were always books around. And my aunts and uncles and my father would actually have debates. They were big on, watching politics or watching, debating current events.
Sure.
So I'm this little kid growing up in this household where, you know, we could hear debates about science, about about math, about current events, about politics. And so I had plenty of people pour into me for all these years,
So you're getting an education through just listening at home.
just listening at home. And
Yeah.
especially like African American history.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but also, we grew up in the era, both of us about the same age. We grew up in the era where your parents taught you at home things that schools, either didn't teach or they would just enhance what was taught at schools.
Yeah.
So I had the benefit of, great teachers at home, great teachers at school. What I was missing sort of is that sort of male role models at home. My dad was only 19 when I was born. I think my mother was 18. That's back in the late 60s.
Sure.
So my dad actually founded African American and Afrocentric school at Eastern High School in Washington, D.C.
Remember you telling
But
me.
he did that when he was like 18, 19 years old.
Wow.
So it was called the Freedom Annex. They were tired of basically going through school and working in classes and with a curriculum that didn't reflect their experiences at all.
Yeah.
So my dad got together with a couple of his friends and went and lobbied the DC Council, went and lobbied.
This is before he was 20 years old. I mean, this
This
was
is before, he had the audacity to do that at that time.
that's
So,
amazing.
everybody knows, I'm all about African American history and just,
Yeah.
our current condition and everything. But I get that from my dad.
Yeah.
And at the same time, while he was doing that, he went away to college. He didn't marry my mom, married my sister's mom. And I sort of stayed with my grandma.
Sure.
So I had my dad was, we were kind of estranged for a while. And I had some uncles there, but again, if it wasn't for like the male role models I had at school,
Sure.
that was huge in shaping my, who I am today.
Yeah.
And it happened through sports. Once I was like 6 feet tall in the sixth grade. And back then, 6 feet
Yeah. Like,
tall in the sixth
yeah.
grade, you were a giant. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to end up 7 feet tall. I ended up being 6'4". But back then, before the kids are like they are now, eating whatever we're eating now,
Yeah.
it's nothing to see kids who are 6'4" playing basketball now, playing like point guard at
Yep.
6'4".
Yep.
So the more I got into sports, then I had the coaches there to sort of guide me along the way, so everything that I have in my life, I have because somebody somewhere along the way poured into me.
Yeah.
And it's important to me after I began to teach, to understand the power of that there are some kids out there, some teachers out there now at this point in my career where I am obligated to do the same,
Yeah.
to pour into other people at this point.
Do you feel like because of your experience and what you see from some of our students today, do you feel like that's why you don't give up on any kid, because you know that they can do with the proper support, that they can be successful?
Exactly. And always think back to who I was as an elementary kid,
Yeah.
how I would have presented myself to a teacher there. And my teachers never gave up on me. My grandma didn't come to the PTA meetings, but they knew I was loved, and they continued to teach me. And I throughout my career, I've tended to teach at schools that were in neighborhoods kind of like the neighborhood that I grew up in,
Sure.
with a couple of exceptions here and there.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to give back as much as I could to try to be for my students what I wanted and what I did receive as I was growing up,
Yeah.
from either my coaches or my teachers.
Yeah. So you just kind of reflect on your experience as an athlete, when you were younger, and then in high school, and then as a Division I athlete. How has that, being an athlete, or playing sports, how has that influenced, if it has, your teaching and working with students?
People don't understand there's a lot of parallels to
Yeah.
being especially a college athlete or a major high school athlete like I was. Those were my best years. When I got to William and Mary, I ended up getting hurt, so I didn't play a lot. But got to sit on the front row of some great games, be in some great arenas, and
You're gonna
met
make
some
me say
brothers for
something about.
life.
You're gonna make me say something about Duke. I'm gonna leave that for later.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I grew up, I was a Duke fan because Johnny Dawkins went there,
Yeah.
and Tommy
I mean,
Amaker.
Amaker. Yeah.
Yeah, so but I also, before they got there, I was like a huge Gene Banks fan,
Yes. Yeah.
and old Jim Spinarkle.
Mhm.
Jim Spinarkle could light it up before the 3-point era,
Yeah.
and Gene Banks was just this like hardcore, kind of like scrappy player, and I saw myself as that because I really wasn't a scorer in high school. Uh, I was a kind of like jack of all trades kind of
Sure.
player.
Yeah.
But that got me to a Division I scholarship. So
Yeah. I mean, working hard and having a great attitude, it can take you so far.
it can take you so far, and I think more than anything, the fact that we're so regimented. Like you knew you had a practice at a certain time of day. You knew you had to lift. You knew you had to eat a certain way.
Yeah.
You knew you had meetings with your team, and that just carries over into your work life
Yeah.
because you're used to getting up early. You're used to accomplishing, having very specific goals and accomplishing those goals. And the same thing happens in the school setting, just in a different, just in a different setting, basically.
Yeah. When I played at George Washington, and we had a coach, my first coach was Jerry Gimelstob. He was an assistant with Bobby Knight,
Hmm.
and he was very similar to Bobby Knight. And then my second coach was John Kuester, who played for Carolina. and he was very different from Gimelstob. But what I learned, one is that you have to be able to navigate a lot of different personalities along the way. I mean, your bosses or people you're working with. You also have to navigate sometimes people you don't like, but you have to work together.
Yeah, exactly.
All the things that, like you said, that there's so many parallels to being on a team and playing in a game, the ups and downs, having to get back up and be positive when you're failing. Because when you shoot the ball, this, most people don't shoot 50%. We miss more than we make.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you have to be able to bounce back and brush those things off, just like in life. And I think those are great lessons for anybody who plays on a team or any type of sport.
And then the other parallel is the relationships that we built. Again, we're talking about relationships.
Yeah.
There are guys that I've played with, or I'll say I was on the team with, that are my brothers for life.
Yeah.
And to this day, we talked, almost every day. I have 3 brothers for life that I met at Murray. Actually, 4 brothers for life that I met at Murray.
Yeah.
And we still talk, weekly, and go out, every few months or so.
Yeah.
So those relationships that we build up, it reminds me a lot of the relationships that as an educator, every school that you've taught in, every situation that you've taught in, you pick up something from somebody, you form these relationships, and you end up forming these like sort of lifelong relationships or lifelong mentorships in a way.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found is that being on, especially for me, coming from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where it's really rural and it was very country, but here to DC, and then coming and having teammates who are from the city, from DC, from Newark, New York, you dispel a lot of myths about each other, because you come in with these preconceived notions about each other and how this guy's a country guy, this guy's from the city, or this guy's a white guy or black guy. But when you're on the team and you start to learn about each other, you find that you have a lot more commonalities than you have differences.
Exactly. And in some cases, your preconceived notion of somebody is going to be exactly what you thought, but you still learn to get along with that person.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're on the same team and you spend so much time together that you can't help but get along with people.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, you has, again, in my intro, I said you're almost 30 years or over 30 years in education, and you've had a lot of different experiences. And one of your experiences was that of a minority achievement coordinator. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's a powerful position, and I think you did I've heard you and talk about it before. I've seen you write about it or post about it, but can you talk a little bit about that position and then your position now as a mentor teacher, because that's huge.
So minority achievement coordinator in Arlington, I would say that was the most I guess transformative years of my career. Mostly because I had Cheryl Robinson.
Yep, I do. Yep.
Again, like most transformative supervisor / mentor that I've ever had.
Really?
And I've had the benefit of having like quite a few mentors, quite a few supervisors who were also like mentors to me at every step of the way, actually. But with the minority achievement coordinator position, it was twofold. So our primary purpose was to eliminate the achievement gap. So to provide programs and services that eliminate the achievement gap. So that was the primary focus of it. So there was a classroom component where we would go in and run student groups, basically filling in gaps for students who are traditionally underrepresented, underserved.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that was I was a facilitator of courageous conversations about race and equity in schools.
Yeah.
And that was really important work. And at the same time, I got burned out from it because in some of the situations we're talking about how race, or actually the difference of race between the teacher and the students that they teach,
Right.
That we also to bring in our unconscious bias,
We all,
implicit bias into every situation that we're in.
yeah.
And you have to be aware of where you stand, what your unconscious biases are, and how that plays out in a classroom situation.
Sure.
So we would basically go in and do seminars for entire schools, for departments. One of my favorite ones was when I facilitated these conversations with bus drivers.
Oh, okay.
So when we had all the bus drivers from Arlington Public Schools in one room, it was like a couple of hundred of them, and we had to make them understand or get across to them that you're the first face that a student sees
Yeah.
and the last face that a student sees that represents Arlington Public Schools. So you pick the students up in the morning, you take them home in the afternoon. You're the first and the last face that they see.
Yeah.
So the relationships again that you built with those students, they're going to carry over into the classroom.
Right.
And we had there was some situations where some of the bus drivers were from the same country, but they may have been from different either ethnic groups or social groups in the country.
Yeah.
And that was playing out on the buses. So
Wow.
some of the drivers were having issues with some of the students and some of the students' parents. So we went in and just explained to them like, hey, you're the first and the last,
Yeah.
and you set the tone of how a student comes to school. You set the tone of how they go home. And when they understood that, when we got that across to them, you could just see the light bulbs going off in the room.
I think one of the things that we are not good at as a profession is we create hierarchies ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
our profession. And what I tried to do when I was the principal, an administrator, is to say, okay, everybody in our building who works here is an expert at what they do. They are educators. And so, like you're saying, bus drivers, they're educators. They are,
Exactly.
because they are building relationships. They're helping students start their day. They're helping students end their day. They're teaching students how to ride properly on a bus. All the things that they do. Our custodians, I said, they're teaching us. They're leaders. Our office workers, our cafeteria staff, and I think helping our staffs understand that they are so important to this puzzle, because we can't do this without them. And they can set the temperature. They can change the temperature in the room based on their interaction with students.
I worked with a custodian a few years ago, Mr. Steve, at Kettering Elementary School, and I'm not sure Mr. Steve understood or really understood like how important he was to the school.
Yeah.
In terms of, first of all the students knew Mr. Steve.
Yeah.
And Mr. Steve knew every student. And Mr. Steve would often do lunch cafeteria duty by himself in the cafeteria. And
Wow.
there would be, so imagine, you have the custodian in there, and all the kids knew like, hey, Mr. Steve's right there. I'm not going to mess up. I'm going to eat my food. I'm going to put my trash away. So Mr. Steve was like this integral part of the school, just as important as any teacher, just as important as any administrator. And you have the same thing, like you mentioned, the cafeteria staff,
Yeah.
the support staff in the office. For any new teacher, that's coming into the profession, get to know your custodians, get to know your office staff, get to know your cafeteria staff. One, they're the true backbones of schools. They make the schools run.
Yeah.
They are there before we get there, and they're there after we get there, and they keep the systems moving.
Yeah. And I think we have to, at times, for me, and this is just my perspective, I had to let our support staff know how important they were. Like sometimes they were say, well, I'm just a custodian. No.
Exactly.
Every job. We want our students to see that every job is admirable, is honorable, and if you work hard, then you should be lauded. And so
exactly,
with our custodians, I call her my co-principal, my assistant principal, and we would ask our custodians to teach us every single piece of equipment because we wanted them to be the educators. We wanted them to be the teachers, the leaders, and say, you are the experts. So that T5 buffer and changing the pads, all that stuff, we would have our custodians teach us, and that made them feel good because they were the experts.
Exactly. And the nice cafeteria ladies, and gentlemen, always the support staff.
Yeah.
Those positions, those people, basically set the tone and the culture for the school, and I don't think people realize that as much as they should.
Yeah.
When you first walk into the office, I get to visit a lot of different schools now in my mentor teacher role.
Sure.
So as soon as you walk in the office, you can tell, like the culture of the school. And that's just, again, just like those bus drivers were, that office staff is the first face that people see when they sign into a building, and the last faces that they see when you sign out of the building. And they sort of set the tone of, what is the school, what's the culture of the school? How welcoming is it?
Yeah. I walked into a school today. A former teacher of mine, Christy Yarn, is now a principal, and I went to visit her because she's a new principal, and I wanted to kind of give her just to say hi and just to give her a little pep talk. And I walked into the building and into the office, and the staff was smiling, the office staff, very welcoming. And I said, you only get one chance at a first impression.
Exactly.
And I say, when I walked in there, I felt welcome already. They didn't know who I was. And it was just, again, that idea of helping every single person in the building understand how important they are to the education of our kids is critical.
Exactly.
Hey, last year, you started off as a mentor teacher, and then something happened. You had to go back and you write about it in my book, because you talk about how you had to pivot, but you had to pivot kind of like, I don't know, a couple months into the year to go back to the classroom. Can you talk about it? And you wrote about it in my book when we talk about, fostering connections and empowering students. Can you talk about, one, having to go back into the classroom in, midway through, and then how you made those connections with students, and what did you do? I mean, you talked about it in my book, but I want you to kind of share some of the ways that you started to build relationships going into the classroom after school had already started.
Right, and that was difficult. Prince George's County Public Schools experienced massive teacher shortage last year, as a lot of people around the country are doing now.
Yep.
Central office staff with teaching degrees were reassigned back to a classroom to be the teacher of record for the year. And this happened just a few days before school started. So we had like a little transition period. At the same time, my oldest child was diagnosed with Crohn's and ended up having surgery to have their colon removed. So I was out for a while after that,
right,
as well, to pretty much take care of them. So I ended up taking over the class in I believe in December.
Wow.
So what worried me going in is I knew how important like those first few weeks of school are. And I knew how important it is to sort of build those relationships along the way. And those students had already built up relationships with a couple of teachers throughout the year. So when I took over the class, it was I knew going in that it was going to be difficult because, one, I was their, I believe, second or third teacher for that year that was in the class.
What grade was this?
It was fifth grade.
Yeah, that's not
so
easy.
You have fifth grade students, in Prince George's County. Next year, they're going to go to middle school.
Yeah.
And they've already sort of imprinted on another teacher or another couple of teachers throughout the year. And here's this guy that they don't know, just, showed up out of the thin air as far as they were concerned.
Right.
The students had already built up their relationships, student to student.
Sure.
They had already imprinted on another teacher, fantastic teacher, Ms. Dinkins, and so here I come in.
Yeah.
So it was important for me not to lead immediately with the curriculum.
Yeah.
So it took a long time. I took that class over in December, and I have to say it wasn't really until we went on a camping trip actually. Prince George's County has Camp Schmidt down in Brandywine
Okay.
that all fifth grade students go and they do it overnight. So it wasn't until we went on that trip, and we didn't go on that trip until really March. So like from December to March, it was a daily grind to
Sure.
build these relationships, build in my routines, build in everything.
Yeah.
Just because the students really didn't trust me. They didn't know me.
Yeah.
And they missed their old teacher. So around after that trip, it was like night and day, because one, I got to see them in a setting that I normally didn't see them in,
Sure.
and they got to see me in a setting that they definitely normally wouldn't see me in.
Yeah.
And for those 2 days, I was the guy that was making sure that you made it through the woods on the path.
Yeah.
The guy at the end of the obstacle course to, give you a high five and tell you, hey, you did a great job. And they saw me in a different light after that.
I think about you and coming into that classroom, and they were very fortunate because you had the knowledge, skills, wisdom, experience to know that this was going to take time. If just a brand new teacher was plopped in there and just started trying to race through the curriculum because I feeling the pressure to try to cover stuff,
Exactly.
instead of excuse me, doing the most important things is connecting.
Exactly. And the curriculum is important. And like I said in the book, the curriculum is important. Instruction is important. But none of that is going to matter if the students don't trust you.
Yeah.
And none of that is going to matter if the students don't see you as a person and you don't see them as people, and really get to know them, really get to know their parents. So I mentioned in the book as well that some of the things that I did to sort of force getting to know them was volunteering for carpool duty,
Yeah.
going out in the afternoon and just meeting parents, talking to the parents, positive phone calls home.
Yeah.
There was a few times, we walked students home.
Yeah.
And you get to meet people in the neighborhood. You get to see the grandmas that are picking up the students.
Yeah.
And me raised by my grandma, I automatically gravitate to the grandmas that are picking students up.
Yeah.
So you build those relationships up with the parents, and the positive relationships, and they get to see you as a person. They get to see that you have their students' best interest at heart, and that makes those difficult conversations that you may have to have later so much easier.
Yeah.
Because they know,
Then
you can tell your friend anything.
Yeah.
Because your friend knows that it's coming from a good place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, by that same philosophy, building those positive relationships just allows you to be able to have those more difficult conversations later on.
Yeah.
And people understand that, this guy has my child's best interest at heart, and they're not just getting after them for no reason.
Well, you've shown them that you go on the extra mile. I mean, walking a kid's home or just making sure you're purposeful and car duty or meeting people. They see that. People notice that. Hey, in the book, you also talk about this concept of windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. Talk a little bit about that in terms of the students.
So windows, mirrors, and sliding doors, mostly windows and mirrors. The sliding door concept, you actually told me about that. So the windows and mirrors, the curriculum, the school experience should serve as both a window through which people see other people's experiences, and a mirror in which their own experiences are reflected. This is my opinion, and this is my experience. American schools do a good job of providing windows for minority students. We do not do a very good job of providing mirrors for minority students. And to me, it's no surprise that there's an achievement gap that's predictable by race, especially in school systems that don't provide those mirrors. And we're in a situation now, nationwide, where in some states, some people are smashing those mirrors as much as they can. Yeah. And that, to me, that's a dangerous precedent, dangerous thing. We're going backwards.
Well, I think the other thing is, and you said it, it's for those of us who have parents at home who are teaching us history, and that's fine. But some of us, and again, it's not because parents don't care. Some may not have, the time or whatever, or or the knowledge. And if we don't have in the curriculum people who come from our backgrounds or look like us, then a lot of times kids are like, well, it's not that they can't learn, they're just not connected.
Not connected.
Not connected. And so I love, how you talked about in the book, when you write word problems, you'll put kids' names in it. So, if a kid hears their name, they're going to be more interested.
Put the names in, neighborhood landmarks, places that they've been. You can make the work relevant and still teach your curriculum. A lot of times I'll hear, like science teachers in particular, math teachers in particular say, well, math is math, science is science. Yeah, the content is, but you can bring that content to life by relating it to students' lives, making it relevant, making those references relevant. We all have in science class, we always hear, the same group of scientists, throughout school. We're hearing the same people over and over, when there's like, tons of minorities and people worldwide who've made contributions that I think you have to go beyond the book. You have to go beyond the curriculum to pull those people in.
Talk about your role as mentor teacher. So you go from the classroom to mentor teacher, and you say you're visiting a lot of schools now. What is your role like? Is your role kind of prescribed, or do you kind of get to massage your role and connect with people? Are you assigned to one region? What does it look like?
So the mentor teacher position is really we get assigned to teachers who are either brand new to Prince George's County Public Schools, within, so it can be an experienced teacher, but you've moved over from another district.
Right.
And this is your first 3 years in Prince George's County Public Schools. Or it can be completely novice teachers. And what we do is provide sort of like onboarding support, as well as classroom support, really with classroom management and with making sure the teachers are following the framework for teaching, Charlotte Daniels' framework for teaching.
Sure. And are you assigned to a certain group of teachers, or is it kind of random?
So we're assigned to a group of teachers. So the teachers can either self-refer, or principals can refer teachers. So if principals have a group of brand new teachers coming to their school, they can refer, and basically anyone that they refer, or anyone who self-refers, we have a mentor for them. So there are about 55 to 57 of us, I think. And we get assigned to everybody who either self-referred or were referred by their principal. And the funny thing is, this year I'm assigned to all the PE teachers in the county, the brand new PE teachers in the county. Now, my career, I've never taught PE.
I taught PE. That was my first job.
That's funny. But, I can walk into a gym and tell, have you had some pre-planning?
Sure.
Are you organized? Are the students safe? Are you managing your class? Are you managing your procedures? Are there procedures in place? So basically, we're all about classroom management and best practices, basically. So regardless of the subject matter, we can go into, pretty much any educational environment, and within a couple of minutes say, oh yeah, this person's doing this, they're doing that, or they need to work on this, and this.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the subject matter. If you're a teacher, you're a teacher. Like, if
Exactly.
you're going in to watch a music teacher or an art teacher, you're looking to see if they've identified essential skills that all kids need to master. How are they assessing those skills? And if they're not mastering those skills, how are they intervening and extending? That's across the board. It doesn't matter.
Across the board.
Yeah.
So, of course, my specialty is math and science, but another mentor teacher reminded me, like, hey, you're a mentor teacher now. Your specialty is
Yeah.
management best practices, and
Exactly.
that's what you're going to support your mentees on. So now I have 15 mentees at I think 10 or 11 different schools.
Okay.
And the requirement is for those teachers, I see them 45 minutes a week,
Okay.
or an hour and a half every 2 weeks. And
And when you say you see them, do you go into the classroom and observe them, or do you meet with them, or a combination?
it's a combination of both. So, uh, yeah, our teachers now are going through beginning of the year conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So it started with like very basic things. How do you access your curriculum?
Yeah.
How do you put your grades in? How do you publish your grades when it's time for the end of the marking period or midterm period? How do you prepare for a formal observation? Here's the website that you need to go to and upload your formal lesson plan.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy. Teachers have to know like the basics before they can actually
Very
think about
basics.
everything else.
Right. And then, in the classroom setting, so, helping them with lesson planning, like sitting down and really understanding like your lesson plan and planning in general is going to take care of 90% of your management problems.
Yeah.
Because if you have a good plan, you're not going to have downtime. If you have downtime, your students are going to fill that downtime with activity. And it may be positive, but most of the time it's not, because they're kids.
Yeah.
So that's the support that we give them throughout the year, and they get that support is sort of gradually weaned off after 3 years.
Okay.
So once you have a mentor teacher, you'll have a mentor teacher, not necessarily the same one,
Right.
for the first 3 years that you're in Prince George's County Public Schools.
And how are you liking it?
I love it because it is, to me, one of the best way that I can give back to the profession.
Yeah.
After 31 years, the retirement light of the end of the tunnel, I can finally start to see it. But at the same time, where I necessarily would not necessarily would want to be in the classroom
Yeah.
anymore, just because just at a different point in my career, I feel like it's my time to give back, to pour into people the same way throughout my career. Every place I've been, somebody's poured into me.
And I think it's really important because the stress of our profession now and the attrition rate, we're losing teachers faster than we can get them in
Exactly. And there are none in the education schools.
the pipeline. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to give them support, that first 3 years is critical. I mean, I think it was like we lose like 50% of our teachers within the first 5 years or something like that. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it is so your position, I'm glad that they have those positions to give that support to those teachers.
Mm. And a lot of people who resigned last year, they cited that they just didn't have the support that they needed.
Yeah.
So while we were in the classroom last year, fulfilling the role that needed to be filled at that time, it was also
Yeah.
the role of support that we weren't able to give last year as much as we could because we were teaching all day. So,
Hey, what advice would you give to an aspiring educator who's like considering a career change, like kind of like you did?
I would say to really research the profession, uh, to really understand that the learning curve is very steep,
Yep.
that it takes more than just loving kids, or it takes more than having a bubbly personality. And that if you're going to get into this profession, understand that you are going to have to take the time to hone your craft if you really want to be good at it. Yeah, I look back at my career, looking back, 31 years later, those first 3 years, yeah, it was horrible. Just because I was in that learning stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't an education major. Yeah, I was a psychology, first degree is in psychology. Uh, I was taking classes at night, the education and pedagogy classes at night at Trinity. And, it was hard those first, especially that first year, to sort of internalize all of that I was doing and turn it around and teach it at the same time.
Yeah.
So I made a lot of mistakes, and at this point in my career, I look back at my first few classes, and I just shake my head and it's like, man, I was so bad. I wish, I hope my students, forgive me for those first 3 years.
But you know what? Your ability to connect and build relationships was probably the same. It was, you still had that want to build relationships with those kids. And a lot of times that's important because they're like, Mr. Taylor believed in me, cared about me.
And it's funny you say that because I still keep up with a lot of my students from those first few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all of them for the most part are doing like fantastic things in the world. I have student Gregory Archer, who is a detective in Washington D.C., in the same neighborhood that he grew up in.
Wow.
Have a young lady in Arlington that I taught when she was in 5th grade. She's a worldwide recognized singer,
Oh yeah, I was
performer.
there with you. A beer.
A beer, yeah,
Yeah,
a beer. So
I was a counselor there when you were
when she
yeah.
was in my class. So
Yeah.
and then just students from all the years. I've had a chance to keep up with a lot of them, and always pleasantly surprised when I bump into them outside, and they're these grown people with their own students, their own kids now. And I'm just beam with pride because I'm like, I remember when you were, this little 5th grade kid or this 3rd grade kid. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
And I've only in 31 years had a just like 1 or 2 students where the story didn't end so nice.
Yeah.
And I sort of carry those students because I think back and was like, is there anything I could have done different that could have changed their path? But
I think we all do that because it's like, I think that's just who we are. We care so deeply and we want everybody to succeed. And my question to people is always, do you think we should treat the kids who are coming into our schools as if they were our own kids?
Oh yeah.
And have the same expectations. And I don't think in the thousands of people I've asked in Australia, Canada, US, wherever I've presented, nobody has ever said no. So if that's the case, we're literally in lieu of parents in loco.
Exactly. In loco parentis.
So if that's the case, if we, find out that a kid didn't make it or something happened, that breaks your heart.
It does. It does. And those two in particular. But yeah, the success stories.
Yeah.
Much more than the non-success stories. But you still, as a former athlete, you remember the losses more than you remember the wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what keeps you going and trying to get better.
Yeah. Greg, I really appreciate this. This time has flown by. We're actually out of time, but I did want to ask a couple more questions before we go. You talked about, your grandmother and your aunts and your father and other people who have been, really instrumental. Can you talk a little bit about, and I see you on Facebook talking about him. Can you talk a little bit about your high school basketball coach?
Coach McAdams.
Yeah.
So I met Coach way back in, I think it was like 1979. He was head basketball coach at the Murray School. Murray School's up in off of Cathedral Avenue, up near the zoo.
Yeah.
And I grew up in DC, way over in
Right.
Northeast.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what Coach would do is he would come with his assistant coach, Coach Charles Lewis, who actually passed away a couple of years ago now. Would come into the DC public schools and the junior high schools,
Mhm.
and they would talk to the counselors and they would talk to the principals, and they would say, "Well, who are your top students? Your top male students,
Right.
and also who are your top male students that are also athletes?" So they would recruit, and they
Mhm.
would come in and they would do clinics in the different neighborhoods, and then they bring us up to the school. We take the entrance exam, and pretty much they would choose, I think, 2 to 3 of us a year
Yeah.
from all around the city to come to Murray. Um,
Experience, you because there's no bus, right? You had to take the public
oh
transportation.
man, to this day, the reason why I do not take public transportation is because of those years of getting up in the morning, taking a bus at the top of my street to Union Station, taking a subway to Upper Northwest, getting off of the subway, and taking another bus up that hill, Cathedral Avenue,
Wow.
every day, and then the
That's a lesson.
reverse on the way home.
That's a lesson in itself, in persistence.
Oh
you
yeah,
being dedicated to getting to school. But yeah, but so
and
so when you talk about Coach McAdams, I know he got you there. What kind of coach was he? What kind of person with you? I know you still are in touch with him.
still in touch with him. I just went to his induction into the Metropolitan Basketball Hall of Fame. He
Yeah.
was already inducted into the Washington Sports Hall of Fame 2 years ago, I think. But Coach was, you hear him on the radio. So even when he was coaching, he started the radio show, and I think at WOL in DC with Kathy Hughes,
Yep.
and he's done that from throughout his career. But again, to me, he was, and Coach Lewis too, because Coach McAdams ended up leaving, I think, at the end of my sophomore year.
Right.
So I had him the first 2 years,
Right.
and then the end of my sophomore year, he went back to his alma mater, Mackin High School,
Mhm.
and coached there at Mackin High School until the school closed, basically. And then he came back to Murray. But again, to me, Coach has always been like a father figure,
Yeah.
sort of like a dad away from home. As were all of my coaches basically throughout my career, my basketball career. Uh, and again, with Coach Lewis as well. We spent so much time together. You know how it is, spending that time in the practices and on the road and in the games. And uh, yeah, I can't thank Coach enough for, one, the opportunity to go to a school like Murray, uh, where I learned quite a bit outside of the curriculum.
Sure. Sure.
uh, One thing I definitely learned was, yeah, going from my neighborhood in Northeast DC and going to school in Upper Northwest, it was like a culture shock,
Yeah.
kind of. So, yeah, I was going to school with, uh, pretty much doctors, lawyers, senators, kids.
Yeah.
I think at one time, Queen Noor and King Hussein of Jordan. I think one of their students
Oh,
one of their kids went to Murray, I think.
yeah.
So we were basically hobnobbing with in class with the future movers and shakers of not just DC but sort of the world.
But they were hobnobbing with a future amazing educator.
Yeah, that's one way
We
of
need to
looking at it.
raise our profession because we are the profession of all professions.
Exactly. We teach everybody, and even at Murray, I had some fantastic teachers again uh, that I try to channel. I keep the quote that you always say in mind: "Where I go, I wear you."
As I
Well,
go.
I'm wearing you.
Yeah.
So everywhere I go, I'm wearing, so many different people, trying to take the best from all of those people and provide those things that they provided for me to others.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue because we got to end it here. But again, at the end of my sessions, I say, as I go, I am wearing you. I shared that at my dad's funeral a few years ago because he was, he was a reading teacher and then a principal before schools integrated. And when they integrated schools, most of the Black principals lost their jobs and they had to go back to the classroom.
Wow.
Because they closed the Black schools, right? And so but he was always, about education. In my home now, where my mom still lives, my dad had like 10,000 books, and just because he just loved to read. I've had so many people along the way through my life that I am wearing, including you. Like when we worked together, it was really just a pleasure just knowing how much, one, you cared about kids, but just the connections that you made. And it just seems so easy for you. But I think, again, your life experience and what you believe in really allowed you to connect with, any kid, no matter the culture, race, where they came from. You truly saw each child. And so I really appreciate, what you did and what you continue to do for our profession now as mentor teacher. And I just want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, brother. And congratulations on your book. I got my copy.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you writing your piece on relationships and connections, but also on getting me connected with Calvin Barnes, your nephew.
Oh yeah, my nephew.
Great story.
Incredible young man.
Working for TNT is really impressive. So a product of PG County Schools, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Greg, thanks so much. And I appreciate you coming on a conversation with Brian, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you, bro.
Subscribe to A Conversation with Brian on my YouTube channel and Spotify.